What we might do is we'll kick off. So my name is Julie Petty. I work with Seafood Industry Australia as the Policy and Projects General Manager. Today's webinar is all around the topic of traceability and some trials. We're going to talk through some trials that we've been running with a group called OpenSC who are on the call with us today. However, before we jump into that topic, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land and sea and pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as emerging leaders. So as you know, Australia has a reputation for supplying high quality premium seafood. However, there is an expectation from buyers to understand and trust where that product is coming from. With this in mind, SIA has been undertaking some programs of work around traceability, looking at how we can assist, in this particular case, exporters in navigating that global regulatory environment, with the aim of boosting efficiency and ensuring compliance requirements are met. The project, this one in particular, was supported by a grant by the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and the focus of the grant was very much designed to be around export and looking at how we can streamline or improve RegTech requirements. What we did was we partnered with OpenSC, who's a traceability service provider who you'll hear from in a sec, and the project was looking at how we can pilot and do proof of concept for digital components, so not necessarily testing product in market, but tracking the paperwork and the flow and chain of the product as it's moving through the supply chain. We were looking at how we could streamline, admin and data collection, improve data integrity, enhance audit preparedness and improve operational sort of insights through that data collection and analysis. So what we'll be doing today is we're going to just walk through, I guess, what the project undertook. So what were the aims of it, who we partnered with. We're going to look a little bit at the actual product that was delivered, and then look at some of the learnings out of the end of this. We've allowed heaps of time for questions as well, so please feel free once we're moving through to pop those into the chat, or at the end of the presentation you're welcome to jump off mute and start peppering us with questions. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce Michelle, who will be presenting on behalf of OpenSC. So Michelle, if you wanted to start trying to share your screen, that would be great. And what we're going to do, Michelle and I are going to tag team throughout this, talking to different components within the presentation once we get started.
There we go. Hopefully that's sharing now.
Sure is. That's looking great. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So thanks for that, Julie. I'll also just introduce my colleague Phil, who is in the room as well, and who might actually kick us off by giving you a bit of background into who we are and what we do, and then I'll take over.
Across to you, Phil.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Phil Freeman, one of the directors and founding team members of OpenSC, or Open Supply Chains. My screen's not coming up, but it's okay, I know what the slides are. We started our journey 6 years ago, and I want to give you a bit of context about who we are and what we're doing across the globe. We're a technology and impact venture, co-founded and backed by WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Boston Consulting Group, and backed by impact investors, including Humanity United and the Working Capital Fund. And we're working at source across the globe on a multi-commodity basis: coffee, rice, we've worked on dairy as well, and in multiple continents now. I think we're up to 5 continents around the world that we've got traceability in place. And we're working with large global food companies to ensure they have access to higher value markets. That's in the seafood industry, obviously. Coffee is our largest commodity. We also work on rice and dairy, as I mentioned. So I'll hand over to Michelle now. She's one of our lead implementation engineers and solution architects, and she's going to take us through this project, and we're looking forward to having time for a good discussion and get into a conversation at the back end of this session. Thank you.
Yeah,
Michelle?
definitely looking forward to hearing from everybody towards the end. So hi everybody, really glad to have taken part in this interesting topic. Just FYI, I'm a bit of an advocate for traceability technology, anything that is to do with agriculture. I love it. So I have enjoyed this work thoroughly, and I just wanted to say thank you to SIA and to the people in this room who have been pretty generous with your time along the way. I think we've come up with some really interesting insights and paving a way forward for the seafood industry as a whole. As Phil touched on, at OpenSC, traceability is really core to what we do. So our platform enables some of the world's largest food and beverage providers to really link what's happening at source all the way through their value chain, and then say things about their products, whether it be prove compliance, whether it be say something about the sustainability credentials of their products. And that's really where our platform brings together data models, machine learning, blockchain, and some of the cutting edge technology to piece together the story of your products and unlock value at the end of it by generating and sharing data to third parties. So we've been asked today to share 35 of the 80 slides that we presented as our final report. So there's obviously not enough time to do that. It's a lot to get through. I want to make sure there's time to talk about everything at the end and hear from you as well. So I'm going to be moving quickly, but of course, please feel free to contact myself or Julie or Phil afterwards, and we'd be more than happy to go dig a little deeper and have more of a chat. Okay, so what were we doing? As we said, this work was part of the National Agricultural Traceability Grants Program, which had multiple objectives. The key focus for the work we were doing was how can we enhance Australia's agricultural supply chain traceability systems and provide a competitive advantage to exporters. So then the core problem that we set out to achieve and to tackle through this work was how do we navigate the constantly evolving and significantly manual efforts and inefficiencies that come with the manual efforts that are in place in the current seafood compliance workflows. So we had a couple of hypotheses. We had 4 hypotheses. Firstly, that digital traceability and automation, technical automation, would improve or reduce processing time. Secondly, that the same digital systems would improve accuracy of data. Thirdly, that compliance becomes more efficient as a result of the technical implementation. And fourth, that the availability of data, the accessibility of this data, and the usability of it. So how much of this data already exists in business as usual? How accessible is it for a solution provider to acquire this and transform it into the valuable format that it needs to be? And then what format is it in order to transform it to that required end format? We have a hypothesis that all of those are feasible, and that's what we sought out to test. And in terms of how we did it, our methodology, we took on a 3-phased approach where we researched deeply and discovered anything that we needed to know about the compliance context. We designed and trialed specific components, and then we synthesized the outcomes and learnings and thought out, what's the recommended pathway moving forward. So let's take you through a bit of that now. Starting with research and discovery. So this phase spanned across, desktop research, structured research, engagement with industry, lots and lots of analysis of documents, prototyping, and all of this led to informing the development of the regulatory technology or RegTech trials. We conducted extensive interviews, spent hours with many people, some of which are probably either in this room or might listen back later. We analysed and extracted data from over 100 documents, spanning from catch to landing to processing and shipment. And we assessed data and data collection systems. Cool. So then the research looked at what data is being captured. I think I just skipped over a couple of slides, but that's okay, because essentially we wanted to know, in the business as usual, what's the data that is currently being recorded and that fisheries mandate. And given that logbooks are required, the data contained within logbooks and e-logs are probably the most relevant data source from where to obtain critical catch data for any type of RegTech solution. What we found, of course, is that the complexity comes in, the quality of these catch logs, or how efficiently the data is being recorded, how much it actually matches the reality on the ground. But these complexities are agnostic to what product we're talking about. It's seen in all supply chains. Record keeping is sometimes either the thing that unlocks potential or the thing that holds you back. Similarly, in compliance purposes, the next critical event is typically landing, and there we saw that the catch disposal records could provide the needed data, and that's really the next key step in the product's journey and the compliance reporting. And we were able to use the research to give us a detailed list of exactly what data is needed and supplied to AFMA to comply with the fishery requirements, and therefore which data is already available to a potential traceability and compliance automation solution. Whoops, just go back on there. So there's more compliance and reporting that is in the broader sort of compliance networks that we looked at. However, they didn't take part in any of the trials that we looked at. Namely health and safety and country of origin labelling. And the research demonstrated that compliance to these frameworks is extensively understood, quite widely adopted, and we concluded that it wouldn't be a primary focus of the work. Great. So what are the learnings that started to come out of our research? There are a lot, but the three key learnings that emerged are that there's really a lack of consistent requirements across regions, across jurisdictions, across different states in Australia. And that presents challenges for when you're scaling technology. And if we have inconsistency nationally, you can imagine how that becomes exponentially larger when we're talking globally. But it's a consideration that needs to be taken on board when thinking about the scalability of technical solutions. Interestingly, there was a correlation in the variance of how the compliance burden is perceived by a company. So the level of vertical integration that we saw in the supply chains we spoke with directly, is directly related to just how hard is it to comply to this compliance burden. If you're digitally mature, those actors kind of came back saying, no, this is fine. Compliance is actually a simple part of our workflow, whereas your more fragmented supply chains that have to deal with multiple entities may be struggling with the compliance workload. And then the third learning that emerged was quite prevalent through our engagements was the need for one source of truth. So some companies expressed difficulty in keeping up to date with the regulatory landscape for each country that they export to, and really called for a need for one source of truth system. Also, please jump in with any sort of comments or questions. I can't see you, but I'm here and I'm listening.
Okay. Hi, yep. It's Richard. Sorry, can you go back a slide? Yes. I don't want to bog you down in questions because you're on a roll. What was the last point there? Aquaculture certification challenge.
Let me just go back to this.
Did I miss something?
No, I didn't actually. It's there because these are topics that we covered, but it's an interesting one that it wasn't the primary learnings, but essentially some aquaculture companies identified the need for easy access to these compliance documents from their suppliers. So how can a regulatory technology solution support aquaculture companies to obtain all the disparate data sources in a seamless manner, because it's a lot of hand-holding and a lot of phone calls and a lot of management that is costly and requires a lot of human effort. So that's one of the key learnings from the aquaculture side.
Okay, he's happy. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I muted my line.
Okay. So then looking from the retailer perspective with regards to what do they require of suppliers. So Coles and Woolworths, we spent some time working with different units in their companies, and they impose their own strict and extensive compliance requirements, and they're quite often centered around those existing third-party certifications like MSC and ASC. So it's pretty clear that those standards are kind of always a precursor to what the government regulators will require in future. Getting ahead of them is key, and incorporating them into digital solutions is also key. Okay, so let's look at exports and imports. On the export sides, currently our biggest export market is China, and you can see Hong Kong second, Japan and US fourth. And if we look at the import side, here are the largest importers of seafood, where it's dominated by EU and second USA. So it really makes sense to be looking to expand into EU and USA. And they're the two markets that we looked at in the scope of this project. But just for a bit of background, not that you're going to read all of this, but each different region that we looked at presented its own complexities and also opportunities when it came to leveraging traceability and technology to streamline compliance. So for example, China is a key market, particularly for high value species, lobster and abalone, but trade tensions make it super unpredictable. Compliance is going to be changing constantly, and therefore technical solutions are going to be changing constantly. So right now, not really looking at that as a primary space to endeavour into. Hong Kong, significant seafood consumer and major export market for us, but a lot of the product is re-exported, particularly to China. So again, there's a few limitations there to consider when thinking about regulatory technology trials. Looking at Japan, this is a stable geographical region, significant market for our Australian seafood and second largest. Their import programs are really strict. They're super well documented. The size of the market and the products being imported make it ideal for regulatory technology testing. So that was one that was on our radar, definitely. Sorry that I seem to keep skipping on slides, but we'll make it work. And then looking into USA. So US is a huge import market. It's probably the biggest opportunity for growth aside from EU, provided we can meet their stringent requirements like SIMP, which is what we looked at. This program is well defined and it's really understood within industry, and it presents a good option for tech implementation and testing of automation. So EU, even though our seafood only accounts for a fraction of their imports, the catch certificate, the EU catch certificate scheme is fairly complex. It's got a lot of requirements, much like SIMP, and it presents an opportunity to really bring that intersection of traceability data that you're already catching as business as usual, and combining it with regulatory technology to sort of bridge the gap between data that exists and complying to these types of certification schemes. Okay, so understanding the complex catch scheme, we learned that the two main pain points to compliance that we sought to understand were the technical capacity and knowledge in teams, in businesses, such as some of the people that are here today. And so how do you possess that capacity, the knowledge to stay on top of it, the knowledge to then implement any sort of system other than Excels, etc. It's particularly challenging for small scale producers or anyone that's kind of not vertically integrated. And then also the EU catch certificate scheme heavily emphasizes the need for traceability throughout your supply chain. So you may face challenges in ensuring that transparency. If you are audited, the credibility of the transparency that you have provided becomes may be tricky, and that's where I think that the two main pay points for testing and maybe deploying things for the EU catch scheme makes a whole lot of sense. And similarly for the USA and the SIMP program, the cost of compliance, the cost of generating, gathering, and linking all of the traceability data between catch, processing, landing, and any sort of shipping that takes place and chain of custody is very costly, and particularly costly in terms of human effort, reporting, making sure that your numbers all match up, etc., so that if an audit comes along, this data is fully compliant. So what we did is looking at the market opportunities. Just to summarize here, we landed on Europe and USA because really there's the highest regulatory challenge and it's the highest market opportunity. And there's some technical structures there by which we can operate to sort of build technical solutions and test them. All right, hopefully we're doing good for time. I know I'm going fast, but like I said, we're here now and later. I wanted to jump into the trials. So who did we partner with? How do we choose, and what components do we choose to trial, and how do we choose those? What are the component designs, and then what are the results? So actually, Julie, I know you spent quite a lot of time in working with partners and engaging with them. So I might actually, you wanted to have a bit of a talk here?
Yeah, no worries, thank you. So when we were looking at, we ran a process where we reached out to a number of people all across industry to say, hey, look, this program is running. There's opportunity to partner with us to look at, how we might be able to use the solution to streamline, RegTech challenges within the company or streamline data collection. So across both aquaculture and wild catch, a number of different species and jurisdictions, we did a number of interviews with people to better understand, one, so they could understand the possible solution that OpenSC could provide, and for us to also better understand what the challenge was, what's the problem that particular company was looking to solve. The ones that we ended up, our intention was to run through, between 3 to 5 different supply chains to do that data collection, to look at an analysis of their, that data supply chain, and to identify different opportunities that we could then move forward potentially with a small scale trial with. So the 3 companies that we ended up doing that initial stage, so doing that analysis of the supply chain, obviously Brolis, Austral Fisheries, and Australian Bluefin Tuna. So those guys obviously targeting different types of markets. We've got different types of products there, and the use case or the problem that they were looking to solve was, slightly different between those. So Austral, I believe, it had previously some challenges with product duplication in some of their markets. Brolis had quite a sophisticated system in place already, and they were just looking at whether or not was there anything else that potentially they could improve there. And Southern Bluefin Tuna, there was discussion around, well, what markets might they be able to expand into? What might be the requirements from those markets? So we worked through those with those companies and provided some detail back to them, which most of which we won't be able to share today because it is commercially sensitive, but we provided that supply chain mapping and data mapping back to those guys. Michelle, is there anything I've forgotten there? I think that's probably...
No, that was good. That's good. Thanks, Julie. And it's also interesting to see with the engagements that we had, the different perception of what regulatory technology is and isn't, and what it can bring in to the business as a whole. And I think that's core to some of the the findings and the recommendations we'll talk about later, is that there's really not a clear definition for what really is the intersection of technology, compliance and regulation, and how can that actually drive value to my business. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, so then, we ended up looking at 2 specific supply chains to build bespoke custom components, and specifically we utilized data from Austral Fisheries Glacier 51 toothfish supply chain and their Skull Island tiger prawns supply chain. And so what did we do? We, in consultation with the broader industry and also with our data and technology teams, looked at what are the main components that emerge from our research that could be valuable to design. And 9 components came up that we could look at designing and trialing, and they range from data extraction and transformation towards representing supply chain events by utilizing a global standard, all the way through to report generation and data generation for particular compliance schemes. So then, in order to think from 9 to 2 components to trial, how can we actually assess what is going to drive value and what means the most to the Australian industry members that we've spoken to? And we defined the following assessment criteria, looking at what's the current level of digitization for each component. You know, is there already a system that's digital, or is there currently a lot of paper-based data collection happening? We looked at a second lever, which is what's the transferability and the scalability of this component. If we were to build it, is it relevant only to one supply chain that we've spoken to, or relevant to all supply chains that we've spoken to? What's the impact of the component on existing operations? So is this already automated? And so the value add would be marginal, versus are we eliminating manual processes? Are we taking the repetitive tasks and freeing up human capital for productive tasks? And how do we scale that impact? And then what's the value when comparing the current operating procedures? So is it minimum benefit versus high value add, which is kind of the same thing, I think, there. So when we assess those, we end up with an overall score of the value, and this is how they've scored. So highlighted in green is one of the 2 winners in terms of the highest score on those 3 metrics. So automating traceability report generation for EU and potentially other markets, and then similarly automating import monitoring program worksheets for US. Yes, for US. Okay. And the reason for the selection of both of those is for SIMP, it's a manual effort. It's very hard to track finished products across multiple documents and multiple players, especially for those fragmented supply chains. And in fact, that's for both and for any supply chains. As soon as you introduce fragmented supply chains, it becomes hard to keep across all of the documentations and ensuring that they're actually, you know, the data integrity is maintained across multiple players within your supply chains. And also, when looking at the SIMP, it covers 13 species groups, so that's a lot of species. So the concept is really that if we can unlock how to create this, you know, this automation and these efficiencies for one species, then how do we quickly try and see if we can scale it across many species and making it more profitable, essentially, for anyone that can implement this into their business. All right, so then as we move towards the actual trials, the main elements that we needed to replace were, you know, this creation of intermediate documents. So you'll have a data source here, you have a data source there. In between, you need to create a spreadsheet or a list that joins a couple of data points, because you know you have a pallet that is going to be exported on such and such container. I need it to look like this for my final report. And this introduces the inefficiencies and the errors that we've seen across the board. We're looking to eradicate or reduce, those human errors that are natural occurring in data entry, and reduce the bottlenecks in terms of knowledge management. And what I mean there is, and maybe some of you this will resonate, is typically you've got the one person in your business that you go to because they know everything about this compliance scheme. And if they're not there that day, or you need to upskill or onboard the next employee, it's that person that holds the knowledge, or that team of people. So the idea is not to replace that person, but to diffuse that information through your business, and implementing some automation allows that, because it takes the burden off just the hand-holding and the doing of the work through to allowing the usage of the tools and the knowledge to be shared through the business. So that's the current state. And if you look now at what is on screen, I'm just going to slow down a bit because I think this is where we start to unpack a little bit what it looks like, what the trials look like, and what it could look like in the future. So as a proof of concept, and as we designed it, this is all centered around the ability to take multiple data sources from a range of different, it could be locations, or it could be from one database, or it could be from one person's desk, to clean the data, extract the data, clean the data, validate the data, and transform it into a format that's more useful for digital systems to then create that layer of value on top. So the design contained catch data, landing data, and export sort of shipment data. And it sort of aggregates all of that and creates a master data set. And then from here, you can generate your reports as per the right-hand side of that diagram. So the data points that are extracted from these documents are ingested into a location. In this case, we ingested it into our centralized database, and then you kind of normalize them so they can be used for multiple reasons or multiple exports. In this case, just compliance, but of course, always coming back to the fact that the way we, as sort of experts in traceability and all of this multi-commodity sort of applications globally, the way you consider it is normalizing data so that you can then use it to leverage value across your business, as opposed to for one single outcome. Okay, so what was in our prototype and design? The key requirements that we needed to answer to were, how do we establish traceability links between documents and data sources? How can we digitize or codify these links in a scalable manner? How do we understand the format that is coming in from these data sources, and how do we normalize it so that the data formatting coming out of it is reusable by multiple sort of analysis modules? How do we design for data quality checks? So initially, and in this proof of concept, all the data quality was manual, but that essentially is a key step in defining how you automate this in a data pipeline. And then we developed and we tested a data pipeline that extracts, transforms, and cleans the data. And then how do we make the results available through an interface? So we've included some visuals on the right there. I know they're tiny. It's really just to show the complexity of data flows and relationships. And this, when we kind of zoom out and we think this is one operation of your businesses, this is why automating and streamlining makes a whole heap of sense, because I'm sure you have hundreds of thousands of small pieces of work that are this and more intricate. So yeah, automation is going to be key to supporting your profitability in future. Okay, moving on to trial results. So what were the results of these very structured proof of concept tests? We used our OpenSC's traceability and sustainability platform. This enabled us to sort of rapidly prototype. So what that means that we built a custom internal tool, and you can see a couple of screenshots on the right. And at the bottom, the right-hand side is a user interface, a quick user interface to demonstrate the EU user interaction, where they input some data. In the background, it gathers all the required data to generate an EU catch form, and the user can download the form. And similarly for the SIMP workflow, which is at the bottom, a user can look at your yearly summary, for example, and then generate a worksheet, which can then be supplied to brokers or import program managers, either nationally or externally. And this internal tool at the moment is, as I said, a proof of concept. And what it shows is that the bulk of the work is really in taking this unstructured data and normalizing it. And that's going to be really the major unlock to implementing any sort of technological sort of traceability solutions for compliance and for everything, is that part of the process where you take all of your messy data and convert it into something that's nice and neat and reusable, is where the return on investment comes and the value add really comes in. So our trial validated that we can convert this unstructured data. We had something like, I think in SIMP, it was, I think from the diagram, 6 different types of documents from which we're gathering many data points. And we validated that those data flows worked, and we can transform them. However, we looked at, if you could refine it, you can really optimize human resources in reducing time spent and the cost of time spent in manually doing that by implementing these technical solutions, but there are inherent limitations that we observed.
Michelle, I might just 5 more minutes and then we might.
Cool. We're almost done. Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it. The limitations, and this is something that we had a hypothesis about at the beginning, and it's definitely proved that it's true. So relying on unstructured data is difficult. So if you're a solution provider like OpenSC, unstructured data, we have systems in place to transform that. But if you are trying to build capacity in your teams and you want to automate those data flows, it's really tricky, and it's very hard to create something when you don't have a template. So the SIMP, for example, program does not have a template to work towards. And how do you then create the in-house capacity to maintain these technical automation tools? If you may not have engineering capability in-house, and then you engage with the solution provider, but then how do they maintain the technical solutions? And this will come into what the final recommendation is, that, and I'm sure, Julie, you'll have another bit to add on that, around how really it's not a surprise that the main thing that needs to be implemented here is sort of industry-wide adoption of technical tools, as opposed to custom tools being deployed for each and every company, because really the problems are generic to all of the companies. So therefore the solutions should be, agnostic to which company they're being deployed to. So quickly going through, looking at the value and the impacts of these 2 trials. 5 buckets emerged for us. So economic impact, it's estimated that we can reduce manual effort by 60 to 80%. Now that's a huge number, and that's zooming out and thinking, if you automate across your supply chain the collection of data at catch, landing, and presenting, so creating reports, you could reduce manual effort by 60 to 80%. These trials demonstrated it's possible, but then getting across that line is the messy part and the hard part. And then you'd improve your data integrity, and you have more accurate, programs in your supply chains and compliance reports. So regulatory impact, rules-based systems definitely going to ensure more consistent reportings, and I think that's really important when it comes to your audits. And it helps the industry sort of adapt as well. So if you have solutions and systems in place that cater for changes to regulation, it reduces the need for your in-house knowledge and capacity to be constantly on top of this. And operationally, these types of solutions implemented in supply chains can enhance visibility and control. So you end up with a very granular view of your systems and your operations, something that's kind of similar to your ERP data. In fact, traceability data within your ERP data is incredibly powerful. And really having that could act as a catalyst for industry transformation. There's obviously challenges to adoption, specifically a lack of connection between this compliance, traceability, and technology. And I think it's important to always consider that large industry players can probably more easily adopt innovation, and Austral fisheries are a great example of that, but smaller producers are going to face greater challenges to implement this sort of changes. So what are the recommendations? At a business level, I think implementing traceability more holistically creates value across the business. And if we look at the diagram, we've seen the sketch before. By changing the block at the beginning, you can change the block at the end. So what does that mean? If you look at converting your catch, your landing, your process data into a normalized form that can then be utilized for multiple business requirements, you will unlock value. And that's kind of where I think the industry needs a shift, but you also needs a framework on which to shift to. It can't be everyone sort of designing their own system, because then you're back at square one. And there are global standards. There are systems that some different commodities implement, and I think it should be, it could be no different for seafood to adopt this holistically across the business and across the industry. And then that deeper data and insights should provide that operational enhancements and give that fundamental shift. So I'm going to quickly breeze onto this second last slide, before we look at what to do next and hear from everyone else. I want to zoom out and talk a little bit about what this looks like in other industries where we operate at scale. Because what we have done, as I mentioned before, is that our traceability solutions underpin and export data that creates value to a range of different businesses in a bunch of different ways. And I thought it might be relevant to just have a quick chat about that. Our platform is essentially is multi-layered. We ingest data, that comes from a range of source, and there's lots of different technical connectors that can handle different data and validate and conduct data quality checks, etc. We analyze that data, and that's where really having that normalized data makes sense to be able to do something with it, and then you share. And that's where the interesting layer is for the seafood industry, and for any industry really, because that's where that shared value comes across a business. In this diagram, you can see at the top, the RegTech solution utilizes the underneath layers, or could utilize the underneath layers to do compliance audit reports. So you could generate automated data to supply to the MSC audit process, which I know is a lengthy process. You can generate regulatory reports. You can supply information to your domestic retailers to prove provenance, sustainability, etc., all off the basis of the traceability and the analysis on top of it. So in coffee, we're operating across, I think it's 60% of one of the largest coffee suppliers. Phil, you mentioned across 5 continents. Using this exact platform, we share data about provenance. We do, sustainability credentials, things like regenerative agriculture, fair payment, and it's all linked and achieved by creating that transparency through the supply chain. And you can sort of download reports. You can do targeted, sourcing from the supplier. You can do interventions with your growers. In rice, we've piloted this same system and validated this with the Australian rice value chain. Again, traceability underpinning, in this case, emissions reporting. So that data sharing layer along the top is using traceability to say, what's the emissions profile of this product that is sourced from XYZ location? And it's, traceable to finished product. So just really trying to zoom out and, really talk about the point that the exciting part is really the intersection between traceability and data sharing and what it can mean to the business. The hard part is the messy technical solutions that needs to lie in between. And I think that's the natural segue for me to stop talking and start to think, how can we attack that messy middle part?
Thanks, Michelle. And last slide here, in terms of recommendations, we grouped some shorter term and then longer term recommendations. The short term is really around knowledge building, targeted education to foster a more unified understanding across the industry and across individual businesses within the industry. So that could be done in 2 parts in the short term. We think beyond compliance, workshops, sharing is a great place to start. We need to bring other stakeholders within each business and across industry together to build that understanding how traceability data, where the opportunities are, brand, markets, Also alongside compliance. This is a very compliance-focused project. And alongside that, case studies and success stories. We've got some good quantification of the benefits. We heard about time savings, error reduction. If we can put those in a really digestible, practical package for our partners and internal stakeholders, and we can get some momentum. And then longer term, we're recommending an industry innovation roadmap. To take this further, it does require that sort of scaffolding and structure from the vision about what this can do and where it can take the industry, the platform for collaboration, because as we heard, you know, if one or two businesses do this, they might get some of the way, but they're probably not going to get all the way alone. It takes collaboration also with government, choosing the right parts of the industry to do the next pilot or the next build, and then a phased rollout, because, you know, if we try and do all of this at once, it's probably hard to resource. If we can break it down into affordable chunks or phases or steps, make sure we're aligning with global standards to unlock value early in the program, then we can really go further together. So there are recommendations, and it'd be great to spend a little time now getting your questions, thoughts and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. We might jump straight across to questions, giving timing. So who would like to jump in first? Any questions from the group? Richard, you've come off mute.
I was getting ready.
You came off mute first that I saw, so you can jump in first.
Oh, okay, go for it. So many questions. I've got lists of pages, so I don't know about your time.
Good.
So I didn't know who you were. You didn't really tell us who you were. I had to Google you. You're part of the Boston Consulting Group, what's your WWF and BCG, and your blockchain company. So this is blockchain, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess the one this looks very much like a seafood. I'll do that. Fishing and export, traceability, and blockchain. Absolute value in blockchain. It's amazing technology. No aquaculture. You had one mention of aquaculture about regulatory requirements, and it was all about, most of this was about export of product. And so I can, you know, right. I work with a company, and I was trying to get our company to look at blockchain for raw materials coming in for making feed, because then it's an immutable chain and you can prove categorically where things have come from. So I can see the MSC link and all that side of things. But how does this help with things like country of origin, and why have you focused on big fishing companies and not small fishing companies in aquaculture?
So part of the intro we did earlier was that the grant that was received was focused on export. So the terms coming through from the grant from GAF were that was to be the focus, and looking on that reduction of RegTech.
Okay.
What we did is we went out at the beginning of the project to industry to say, hey, who would like to partner through this? And we held a number of conversations with people across aquaculture and wild catch, all different sizes and different sectors, looking at, you know, what is the service that, or the value proposition that OpenSC could potentially provide, and what is the problem that that particular company had in mind that they were looking to solve. So one of the three supply chains that we went through and profiled was bluefin tuna, so ranging, and then the other two were wild catch focused. Those were the companies that expressed interest in going through that process and were able to provide their in-kind time and data back to the OpenSC team to look at, you know, actually go through and do that analysis. When we got to the end of that and looked at, okay, this is the possibility of options about, you know, what we could proceed with, who of these three companies would be interested in moving forward with a trial, Austral were the ones interested in moving forward. Okay.
No, I mean, I can see the value, like absolutely, like Skull Island exporting prawns. and following the value chain. I mean, I'm a big fan, and I think, you know, the technology is pretty sound. I guess, how do you think this could be used for country of origin labeling, which is now in place? And, you know, how could it be used locally? And
So
how could it be used by smaller companies, if you like?
Yeah, it comes back to what is specifically the problem that you're trying to solve. So what we hoped to demonstrate through this was that there is that cost saving around time of between 60 and 80% in doing that more automated data capture. I think the intention and what we were trying to demonstrate through the project, or my ask, was that we need to look at what the broader value proposition is, because not everyone is exporting to the US. So this was very much designed to look at, if you look, what are the data challenges more broadly within your organization that some kind of automated data collection system could assist with. So would that then mean that you can better communicate and streamline your country of origin messaging and demonstrate and prove that, nope, that's my product that's gone in there, that's definitely, you know, whatever that brand is meant to be in the domestic market or overseas. I think then there's also the opportunity to look at this data collection more broadly within the business and say, what other pain points do we have? So there is a need to look at, you know, can this be used to help us move more quickly to remote auditing through Coles and Woolworths, things like that. But what we did find when we were going out talking to industry on ground was that unless they have already experienced some kind of food fraud or some kind of issue in market,
absolutely,
the appetite was not necessarily there, and the value proposition was still quite unclear. So one of the key learnings out of this very much for us was that a variety of business, small and large, either aren't experiencing those issues, are not getting a direct call through their own supply chain to say, hey, you need to implement X, Y, Z. So as yet, the value proposition coming back down the supply chain is not providing a clear enough signal to move, you know, to do some of this stuff, which is why I think there is a need to have a grassroots program looking at more broadly. This isn't just about traceability. This is about automating data collection that you can then utilize in multiple facets of your business. But this part of this webinar is having this exercise to say, well, actually, there are multiple use cases for this technology. It's not just about traceability.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. You know, in our experience, it's to really make it work for a business, you kind of need multiple pieces of value that stack up. Right. And sometimes the value kind of spikes when you've got a big problem and you really see it, and everyone's like, oh, we're so glad we had that in place because, for example, we've been able to do a much more targeted recall of product. And, oh, wow, we just saved X dollars. It's very clear, right? Yeah. Because we only had to recall, you know, $1,000 worth of product rather than 12,000 because now we know much more what's what. Or it might be in grading, so there might be a significant value that's becomes very crystallized or clear because, oh, well, actually, because we were able to understand our inventory better, we were able to prove to our buyers that all this product is this grade, not that grade, when they said, oh, no, we're downgrading it, you know. Yeah. So that could combine with the value of reduced compliance cost for the export. And then what can be hard to estimate is what is the value of a kind of unblock or unlock to actually get into another market, because that may be partly compliance, but also partly marketing and relationships and all the other things that go into a successful opening a new successful export market. So hopefully that just gives you a sense that that's why we think the next stage is to build knowledge in the short term across businesses about both the different forms of value and the opportunities, and then also to work together across the industry longer term.
Just in the interest of time, we'll jump across to Melanie and then Will.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Michelle and Julie. Congratulations on a really great project. You mentioned that a validated master data set concept would be valuable if it was refined. Did you look at the GDST standard as a global industry standard, like to provide that master data set that could be used to scale?
Yeah, I might jump in here, Melanie. Thanks for your question. I love this question. I'm all about data standards and standards of anything that can revolutionize an industry. The answer is yes. The answer is that, I mean, it seems like a logical thing to consider an existing data standard that has been extended for the seafood industry. We looked at it as one of the potential elements to trial. However, the reason it didn't score, and we had that assessment frameworks, is that there wasn't enough of an appetite to test the implementation of this standard, because it's still a bit too abstract for industry, which is why we need that knowledge and understanding. There's not enough examples of this already deployed and demonstrating value, so it was hard to sort of get people to come across the line. And also there wasn't enough supply chains that had sufficient data to model the GDST and that were interested in and had the appetite. So those factors meant that whilst we know, and we definitely have an inkling that is a pathway that needs to be followed, it wasn't tested as part of this trial, but certainly coming together and collectively attacking implementing GDST seems like a logical part of what we should evaluate as a next step, rather than each company being sort of left to do it on their own, essentially.
Okay, that's great. And what about the AGIFT, the Australian Guide for Implementing Food Traceability for Seafood?
Personally, I haven't looked at that, so I'm not going to respond specifically to that. I might, if it's okay, take a look at it and come back to you. If you had anything you wanted to share with us, though, I'd be keen to hear.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Just noting, it's 1 minute to 12. So if everyone's comfortable, what we might do is continue to work through the questions. If someone needs to jump off, please do. But as I said at the beginning, we are recording this, so you're very welcome once the recording comes out to come back where you needed to jump off and revisit stuff. So Will and then David.
Hi guys, cheers. And obviously thank you very much for including us in the program, working up to this. One of the things that sort of became a lot more clear as we went through the program in our internal discussions was the need for standardizing the input data. The output always seems to be the focus, and obviously that's where we want to get to, but the majority of the work was just trying to get all these different formats and different pieces and different sort of levels of accuracy to all be compliant. Is there any look into a program for, say, like, obviously specific to our industry would be like vessel unload data, or factory produce data, or for that matter farm output, that then feeds into all of these other avenues?
We definitely did at the beginning of the project, which reached out to a number of the different government jurisdictions to better understand where they're currently at in terms of more automation, what their systems look like, and what the rollout, etc., has been, how and why, like how and when we can integrate with those. So I think it's a no-brainer that needs to be the way forward. Certainly, with particularly as we're seeing more cameras on vessels, we're seeing other different monitoring systems coming through. Why on earth wouldn't you look to have these systems working together and be more integrated to then help reduce your compliance time, your time having to report on different stuff that hopefully can be automated? So that would definitely be the intention, but each of the jurisdictions are all at, I guess, different phases and different stages as to where they're at with the different systems, is unfortunately part of the answer there. I don't know if Phil and Michelle, you want to add anything?
I wanted to jump in there and also just quickly acknowledge, thanks, Will. I guess maybe everyone knows you, but Will's from Austral and collaborated with Austral Fisheries and collaborated with my colleagues and our team on this. So thanks, Will. Definitely the input data is the major unlock. The way I see it, and really we see it, is where most of the unknowns exist is where you will get the most benefits in automating. And really at the moment, like you said, the outputs are known, the inputs are not. And really, one of the ways by which we create this value is by looking at what exists already. So it's kind of like a golden rule. You don't invent new data, you use business as usual processes to see how you can turn that business as usual data into your structured digital traceability data. And I think this also leans into what Melanie was asking about, the global GDST. It really is a natural next step to approach this from an industry and government and solution provider all-in-one sort of approach to tackle that messy commencement to the supply chain.
Thank you.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, thanks for that. You stole a bit of my thunder there, Julie, but I guess just starting on from the messy end of seafood, the difficult end. I'm at the Moreton Bay Seafood Industry Association. We're looking seriously. We're trying to traceability for our members, which are individual owner operators. So you couldn't get a more extremely difficult mob than our mob. Now, as we looked into this, I notice you're talking about ingesting data as sort of an assumption here. As we looked into it, we didn't even contemplate ingesting our logbook data because it's not relevant. It's not at the right scale, not at not the right resolution. So we were looking at, our big challenge was how do we get data pouring into this thing, essentially from a position where nothing's happening at the moment that fits the bill. So I guess, and that links with what Julie's saying, at the same time we're being challenged by pressure to put cameras on and all sorts of things. And I'm thinking, my God, we're missing opportunity here to mesh this nexus between cameras, traceability, and the other one is logbook, because I don't see logbook as an input. I see it as an output from the work you're doing here. So I just want to add that as another benefit, is that we can generate the logbooks that we're required to from a new invented process of getting data into this, becoming digital and getting data into your traceability system. Also solves our big problem as to how do we generate logbook information that satisfies everyone, particularly bearing in mind that we're looking at expanding massively the range of products that we process on a boat as we start to utilise bycatch and get a handle on that problem. So we're looking at multiplying the number of products through our processing area, and the logbook problem, the manual logbook problem, becomes impossible. So we need the automated processes that the nexus between cameras and traceability can provide to solve that problem. So over to you for insights to help us with that challenge.
David, thanks for that. I love where your head is at, and thanks for sharing all of that. Some of the work that we do in other supply chains involves, I say only using data that's business as usual, but we may use technology such as scanners, readers, that are in the process of what's happening, maybe boxing up catch or sorting through catch at the same time as you are creating digital identities and timestamping these products. And that's the sort of thing that we currently have implemented across multiple different commodities. And I think that's definitely where it needs to go. The question is always the scalability. So I think I agree wholeheartedly with your statement around replacing the logbook and the manual implications of it. And with the introduction of AI, I think we're kind of on the cusp of new technologies that'll shape how we create digital data. But in the interim, I really think that there's space for laying the groundwork and the foundational structures of how to represent this data. Because if we all of a sudden have the technology to create the data, but we don't know how we're talking about it in a unified fashion, I think we're going to be in trouble. So I'm really interested. I'd love to sort of hear more from you maybe later on a one-on-one, but certainly something that needs to be tackled is taking humans out of it to do productive stuff that machines can't, and then seeing how we normalize all of the data that machines can generate for us. Thanks for that's my insight anyway.
David, if you're happy, I can connect you with Michelle afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that'd be great, and definitely. I'll just say that you're talking before about the inability for industry to see the benefits. With us, we've sort of vaguely see the benefits, and our block is how do we pass the first step at getting the data in. Until we solve that problem, I guess we can't see the value. I'm just saying we can see the value, but what's blocking us and getting excited is solving that initial data in at the source.
Yeah. Conscious of time, I can see another hand raised, I believe.
Gus, do you want to jump in with your question?
I will, thank you. Thanks, and hi Julie, and thank you Michelle and Phil. Seafood is complex with respect to the number of species that you're dealing with compared to rice and coffee, which is probably 2 each globally. So how have you dealt with that shift to a very different scenario with the number of species, and how do you identify and maintain that integrity of identification through the system? Are you using the Australian Fish Names standard and or scientific names, and how do you make that relevant for the importing country at the far end of this?
I might quickly jump in. I know that I've jumped in a few times, but then I'll create space for everybody. In this trial, Gus, we did use the scientific names, and in the way that we approached it, and really I think the way that needs to be approached holistically is to look at the commonalities amongst the many species. And for us, because it's in our DNA to think traceability, the commonalities are apparent. They're really in the types of events that are happening to your very many varied species. They're not necessarily in the intricacies of the species themselves, which are super relevant and will have impacts. However, when you're looking at the types of value that needs to be created from raw data, I think the starting point, the foundational piece needs to be around the common aspects, which has been identified sort of as those key events, and what's the key data that sits beneath it. So we looked at it from that perspective, which is not dissimilar to how GDST does it, looking at, at the catch, what are the key data elements that need to be present? Are they available? How do we use them? And I think that is the logical approach. Then layering specificities of all of the species on top is something that's unlocked for each sort of provider that's using that's exporting different. Would you agree?
Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. Yeah.
I think where you see individual tracking of specific, individual lobsters or fish or something like that, you get an additional layer of transparency and data, but that just means there's another event. There's an event at tagging as opposed to the rest of the events, which might be scanning the barcode of the box, so
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions at all for Phil and Michelle while we have them? Alrighty. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today, and thanks very much for hanging on for the additional 10 minutes or so. Please do get in touch if you have additional questions, you want to be put in touch with Phil and Michelle. Very happy to do that. So I'd just like to say thanks for your interest in your questions today. Hopefully this has been valuable. If you'd like to know more, as I said, please do get in touch. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Exceptionally valuable. Great.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.